4 penalties, 3 race weekends, and now, an official governing body document that finally puts the actual numbers in writing for the entire world to see. This isn't a normal Formula One storyline anymore. This is a full-blown credibility crisis, and once you see the exact margins written down in black and white, you'll understand exactly why a 7-time world champion lost his composure on team radio, why his own team boss started openly questioning the fairness of these calls, and why this story has become impossible for anyone in the paddock to ignore. Stay with me, because we're going through this crisis penalty by penalty, right up to the official paperwork that finally exposed just how razor-thin these margins actually are. Let's start at the beginning, because this didn't begin in Hungary. It began at Silverstone, Hamilton's home race, the one weekend every driver builds their entire season around. Instead of celebrating in front of his own crowd, Hamilton was hit with a 5-second penalty for an alleged false start, a penalty he had to serve during his own pit stop, dropping him behind both George Russell and Max Verstappen. Here's where it gets genuinely revealing. Hamilton later confirmed he formally protested that exact decision, and remarkably, the FIA actually agreed his argument had merit. Think about what that means. A call serious enough to cost him position at his home Grand Prix, yet shaky enough that officials themselves later acknowledged he had a point. Silverstone wasn't finished with him either. That same weekend, he was investigated a second time for a yellow flag infringement. After reviewing what the FIA's own statement described as positioning data, video, timing, telemetry, and in-car footage, the stewards issued only a reprimand, letting Hamilton keep his third-place finish. A technically positive outcome, sure, but it still meant Hamilton left his home race having been formally investigated twice in a single weekend. Then came Hungary, where everything escalated. During qualifying, Hamilton impeded Oscar Piastri's McLaren at Turn 1. The stewards moved fast, handing car 44 a 3-place grid penalty, wiping out a genuinely brilliant lap and dropping him from 2nd to 5th before the race had even started. Hamilton later explained the confusion clearly, saying Ferrari only warned him about Piastri's approach when the McLaren was already at the apex behind him, meaning he had no real way of knowing another car was still on a flying lap. And as if one penalty per weekend wasn't enough, the FIA hit him again during the race itself, this time for pit lane speeding. This is where the real bombshell landed. After the checkered flag, the FIA released official documentation confirming Hamilton's telemetry clocked him at exactly 80.1 km per hour in an 80 km per hour pit lane. The entire punishable offense came down to 1/10 of a kilometer per hour, a margin so microscopic that under FIA regulations, any breach, no matter how small, automatically triggers a mandatory 5-second penalty. Having that number in official paperwork rather than second-hand commentary changed everything. This wasn't exaggeration or fan outrage. This was the governing body's own documentation confirming a career-affecting penalty came down to 1/10 of a kilometer per hour. Suddenly, Hamilton's radio outburst made complete sense, venting to his engineer that they were handing out penalties like crazy, adding afterward that every single opportunity he gives the stewards, they hand him a penalty. What makes this even more remarkable is that this wasn't the first time this exact margin caught him. Earlier in the season at Monaco, Hamilton received an identical 5-second penalty for exceeding that circuit's pit lane limit by the exact same 1/10 of a kilometer per hour. At the time, a visibly frustrated Hamilton publicly called for an investigation into the FIA's own timing loops, insisting he'd engaged his limiter perfectly. 2 separate incidents, same exact margin, same season. But fairness demands we look at the full picture, because Hamilton wasn't the only driver caught by these microscopic margins. Multiple other drivers across the grid, several separate cases, were penalized for the exact same kind of infringement. That actually points to something different than a vendetta against one driver. it points to a governing body applying an extremely strict, zero-tolerance interpretation of pit lane limits across the board, one that happens to be catching Hamilton at a particularly painful moment in his championship fight. Fred Vasseur's comments throughout this saga capture that tension perfectly. After Silverstone, he pushed back hard, saying their own sensors showed no significant car movement on the grid. By Hungary, his tone had shifted towards something more reflective, describing the accumulation of decisions as small stone after small stone, dozens of tiny margins stacking up over a season until they genuinely start weighing on a driver's confidence and a team's championship hopes. Hamilton himself, in his most candid moment, admitted the last two races had been pretty bad from his side, and revealed something that deserves far more attention, that drivers had actually raised this exact inconsistency directly with race control in a formal briefing, pointing out other drivers have made similar marginal movements in the past without penalty at all. That raises the real question at the heart of this crisis. Not whether these penalties are technically correct, because in almost every case they are, but whether the regulations themselves, and the consistency of how they're applied, deserve this level of rigid, mathematical zero tolerance in a sport built on split-second decisions made at nearly 200 miles an hour. With Hamilton sitting 50 points behind Kimi Antonelli heading into the break, every one of these microscopic penalties carries championship-defining weight. Strip away 2 or 3 of these decisions, and his competitive position looks dramatically different from what the standings currently suggest. So here's what we want to know. Now that the FIA's own documentation has confirmed penalties coming down to margins as small as 1/10 of a kilometer per hour, should Formula One reconsider how strictly these rules get enforced? Or are rules simply rules, no matter how small the margin? Let me know in the comments, and subscribe, because this debate is far from settled.